So exciting. We're on time today. We're even a little bit early. So a couple of notes just going forward. We're really lucky that we have such resources in our congregation as far as presenters. And so from now forward for the end of the semester, we have people from our congregation that will be presenting. We have Harold Gazan today. We have Steve McMullen coming up, who is going to do a very interesting presentation for the 2 weeks coming up. With Easter in the middle, no class on Easter. And then we have John Hubers that's going to have a 3-week series on Islam, which should be really, really interesting. And then Pastor Ryan and his panel of people that are traveling to Costa Rica on the border will come and give us a report on that. That's a substitute. It's for George Hunsberger, who had to reschedule, and he'll be in the fall. So you'll see that publicized as it gets closer. Today we have Harold Gazan with us, who we all know. He's a familiar face here every Sunday, but people like me may not know his background. So I did a little bit of a search here. Harold is a retired social worker who had a 35-year career with the state of Michigan. He held deputy level positions with the Michigan Department of Social Services and received numerous honors for his child advocacy work. Among them, a Michigan Public Servant of the Year Award and a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Michigan Association for the Education of Young Children. He's a graduate of Hope and holds a master's degree in social work from the University of Michigan. And we just really look forward to hearing from you, Harold. So thank you for doing this with us. Okay.
Well, life reminded me I'm among friends, and that helped to calm my nerves a bit. I hear a slight echo. It's the sound. Maybe it can be lowered a wee bit. Is that a little better now, or is there still too much of an echo? Yep. All right. Thank you. I would like to open with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we're going to be reflecting upon your faithfulness, your providence, and your grace, meaning everything we have is undeserved. So may this hour be one in which you are glorified. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. I'm going to be talking about myself, but I don't want to be perceived as a victim. Obviously, I had some obstacles which needed to be overcome. But I want us to focus on, and I hope I am focusing on, God's providential grace. I've been privileged beyond what anyone could expect to have a wonderful wife who has been my partner for over 65 years, and a wonderful family, grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren, all of which I see as evidence of God's faithfulness. But I do need to begin with a couple of quotations. This is from Joan Chester and Roland Williams. She was a nun, and he is a retired Anglican minister, and he was head of Canterbury, Archbishop of Canterbury. Anyway, life is a struggle, a journey in uncharted space, an exercise in both gain and loss, joy and sorrow. Life itself is an exercise in learning to sing Alleluia here in order to recognize the face of God hidden in the recesses of time. That's a favorite quote, and one which I think has characterized aspects of my life. And then our late friend, John Hessling, and I need to quote him, and we miss him, I'm sure. From the beginning to the end, the Christian life is made possible by God's grace, as it's experienced by the presence and power of the Holy Spirit. I'm going to focus on 4 key events of my life: my birth and the impact it had on me and my family, economically, relationally, and spiritually. And then my tenure at Moody Bible Institute, from which I graduated in 1956. But it was a time in which I was really wrestling with my identity. Did God have a purpose for my life? I also went through a period of depression. And then meeting my wonderful wife, who became my life's partner. And then my search for family roots and the discovery of my Jewish ancestor. So with that, let me move to my birth. I was born with a bilateral cleft palate, so severe that when I was born, it would not let my mother immediately see me. They took her away, took me away, cleaned me, of course. The doctor explained to my mother what my birth anomaly was, and that I would need to be taken from Blodgett Hospital in Grand Rapids, where I was born, to, in Butterworth Hospital, where I was born, to Blodgett Hospital, where Dr. Ferris Smith had a clinic, and he was a world-renowned plastic surgeon. Some of you may have heard of him. And so after explanation was given to my mother, I was then brought in for her to hold me and to see me. And then for the next 3 months, I was a patient at Blodgett Hospital. I received 3 surgeries during that time. I was then released, but 3 months later, I was returned where I received another surgery and another long hospital stay. My mother told me more than once how difficult it was to feed me because I had no capacity for sucking. And I had to be fed frequently, and that was certainly a challenge for her and my family. Relationally, let me just mention that my birth was a strain on the marriage relationship. Let me fast forward a moment to November 1971. My dad and I are in the hospital room watching my mother, his wife, take her last breaths. We have been with her for about a half a day, and she finally expired from cancer. And both my father and I were emotional, had tears. When he finally regained his composure, he said to me, "Harold, I wish you could have known your mother as I knew her the first 10 years of our life." So I'm driving home from Grand Rapids to Lansing, where we live, 2 o'clock in the morning, reflecting on what he said. 10 years. I was born 10.5 years after their marriage. This shows the impact that my birth had. Economically, I was born January 1936. This was right in the middle of the Great Depression. My parents had already lost their house because of their inability to keep up the mortgage. Now they're living in a little rented house. There was a row of them behind the large house where the landlord lived. I still have images of that house in my mind. And the picture you see on the left is in that area. And economically, how were they going to pay for surgeries? How were they going to handle hospital bills for 3 months? I could go on into other details about that, but time prevents me. But it put an economic strain on them. My father was still employed by Herpesheimer's, but his pay had been cut in half. And he took whatever odd jobs he could find, trying to earn, even if it was only 50 cents an hour, to help pay for my surgeries. Spiritually, my birth also had an impact on my mother, spiritually. What you have to realize is that my sister was born a year and a half after me with cerebral palsy. Now she has a son, her firstborn, 9 years my senior, who in every way was perfect in her mind. And now she has 2 handicapped children. What did this mean? Excuse me. So here again, I need to fast forward to the summer of 1946. I'm 10 years old. My brother is in the Army. My sister Dorothy and I are playing store up in my bedroom. And all of a sudden, I hear my mother crying, shouting, while vacuuming. And what's going on? And I went down the stairs and I see her with the vacuum cleaners banging into the furniture. God, I cannot take it anymore. I cannot take it anymore. And I'm standing there mesmerized. Out of the corner of her eye, she sees me. And she's kind of surprised. She thought, I was out of earshot, I guess. She turned off the vacuum. She came over to me, kneeled, put her hands on my shoulders, and said, "You and Dorothy are God's punishment for having married your unbelieving father." I don't know how to process this. I went to bed that evening and I cried and I said, God, why do I have to be my mother's punishment? Now, my mother, after I and my sister were born, 3 years after my birth, she made confession of faith at Emmanuel Reformed Church in Grand Rapids. This was a blessing. My sister and I were baptized, and I grew up in the church. But the family dynamics were unusual, intense, and it caused me to wonder, about my parents. And my father was an unbeliever, that is true. So was my mother at the time that they met. She had rebelled against her family. She grew up in a very strict, pietistic Dutch Reform home. Her mother an immigrant. Her father's parents, immigrants from the Netherlands. And now she's become a believer. But more, even as I matured into my teen years, she continued to caution me, never marry an unbeliever because God will punish you. Well, this is me and my sister. I'm 5.5, my sister 3.5. This is the three siblings. In 1970, which was the last photograph of the three of us. My brother had a family of 4, his youngest not quite 4 years old. He was a very successful businessman, the pride of my mother. And he died of a cerebral hemorrhage in October 31, Halloween, the very day that we were moving into our home in Lansing. I had been promoted, and we were moving from Grayling, Michigan. And that was like the crowning blow to my mother. She thought God, again, was punishing her. She went into a depression and died 1 year later, almost to the day that my brother passed away. What does the Bible say about this? This is a familiar verse, I'm sure. It's not one that was shared with me when I was struggling as a teenager. Fathers should not be put to death because of their children, nor should children be put to death because of their fathers. Each one shall be put to death for his own sin. But my favorite is this verse. Can you just see Jesus walking along this dusty road with his disciples, coming upon a man who was blind? Rabbi, who sinned? This is kind of built into us. We can become so judgmental. We see something and we make an assumption. Rabbi, who sinned? Well, there are only 1 or 2 choices. They forgot the law, the Torah, which said, children won't be punished for the sins of their father. But Rabbi, who sinned? Parents that he was born blind, or did he? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus. But this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. But let me just briefly share about my family. This is a photograph of my mother and her family. My grandparents, I never knew my grandmother. She passed away before my birth. And my grandfather, I knew him slightly, but he died early in 1944. My mother was the youngest. She is the third from the left. And at that time, this photo, by the way, was taken in November of 1912, and she would have been 14, the youngest, and her next youngest sister is to the right as you're looking at it, Marie. On her left is her older sister, Gertrude, with whom she lived for a while in Boston to learn the millinery trade. And then the firstborn, or oldest, is Peter. Marie on the far right, her son was a minister in the RCA, Robert Stigstra. Don't know that name might be known to anyone. As I indicated, my grandmother was born in the Netherlands. My grandfather was born in Ottawa County. His parents immigrated in 1848, 1 year after Gibraltar, and they were very pietistic. Here's my father's family. That photo was also taken in November 1912. And they were an immigrant family, except for the youngest in the lap of my grandmother. My grandfather is in the back row on the left. Their eldest child was Max, who became a union organizer. My father is next in the back. In 1912, he would have been 13 years of age. And then in the front is Minnie, who was born not too long before they immigrated. And Ethel is to the left. And my grandmother, also named Ethel, and holding Minnie, who was born after they arrived. They were socialists and freethinkers. Now, later when I talk about my family heritage, he came from the branch of the family that had broken away from Judaism and embraced Christianity. But my grandfather became a socialist because the factory owners were also the elders who sat in the front row of the Dutch Reformed Church. They were the ones who exploited child labor, women labor, working 12-hour days, 6 days a week. And he wanted nothing to do with that church. My grandmother was English, born in Sheerness. And how they met was there was a ferry that went between Sheerness, England, which is located on the estuary of the Thames River, to Vlissingen, the Netherlands. And my grandfather was the head steward of the ferry, and my grandmother was one of the waitresses. And they fell in love, and my Uncle Max was born in Vlissingen, Netherlands. My father was born in Sheerness, England, and they went back and forth. Ultimately, he said, working on the ferry is not good for the family. he tried to find work in Amsterdam where they lived, and that wasn't working out very well. And he said, I have an uncle who lives in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And he says that he can find better employment for me. My great uncle worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad. And so my grandfather came over, got employment with the Pennsylvania Railroad, and he thought he was earning a lot of money. And compared to what he had been earning, that was true. And sent for the family, and they all came and arrived through Ellis Island in 1906. So how did they meet? My mother was manager of a millinery shop on Monroe Avenue in Grand Rapids. My father worked at Herpersheimer's. He was on a noon break, and he walked by at a hat shop and saw my mother and thought, wow. He told me he walked back and forth about half a dozen times, and then he went in to the hat shop and invited my mother to go dancing with him on Saturday night. And she accepted. And they began dating. He was introduced to his family. She loved his family. They were non-materialistic. They had fun together. They loved the outdoors. They lived very simply. They were living in a rented apartment, and but she loved the family. Loved going up to Pentwater. My Uncle Max, who was quite successful and in his career, had bought some land on Pentwater Lake from a farmer, and he built a little cottage there, and they loved going up there. They were married in 1925, and their marriage in the early years was a very happy one. My brother was born 2 years later, and they did all kinds of things together. But that all changed, of course, as I've already indicated. So, growing up for me, my early childhood years were a nice home. I never heard my parents argue until I was about 9 years old. And for the first time, I began to hear arguments. And my brother and my mother arguing. I never heard that before. We were on our way. It was nearing Christmas time. We were on our way to visit my granny, my father's mother, who lived to be 99. And my mother and brother got into a terrible argument. Dorothy and I were in the back seat, and suddenly my brother pulled the car over to the side of the street and said, I'm walking home, got out of the car, and walked home. And he joined the Army the next month. Well, it wasn't until many years later I found out what had happened. Now, I shared this among friends. Never shared this publicly before. It wasn't until after my mother passed away, and I heard the story from both my aunt and my mother's hairdresser, who lived catty corner across from my parents. And she felt very sorry for my father. And each of them at a different time shared with me that starting in August 1945, my mother refused to have conjugal relations with my father. She felt that that was what God was calling her to do because my father refused to go to church. And from that time on, dinner time seemed to be a battle for a couple, 3 years. I heard later from my aunt, my father's youngest sister, that my father had considered divorce, but he did not follow through. An indication of my father's devotion to the family. He was a very kind-hearted man. He and his family were very health conscious. There was no drinking in that family. My father abhorred alcohol. He never smoked. When I went to church, I would say half the men were smoking outside the church between church and Sunday school hour. He was critical of the church, and that was the basis for some of the arguments. Well, teenage years were both tough in high school, but affirming in church. Church was an affirming experience for me. The youth group, Boy Scouts, just the church in general. I always felt safe there. I was never the target of taunts or criticism because of my speech impediment. That wasn't true of high school. My school counselor said, I don't think you're really qualified for college preparatory, and assigned me to some classes in the basement of Central High School where I had to take a class in shop. But she reluctantly assigned me to the courses that were required. But I was discriminated against, and I'll not go into that, by the English teachers I had. Other than to say, we all had to memorize a speech from the play Julius Caesar. I had that thing memorized cold. I got in front of the class, my throat closed in on me, my mouth was dry, and the words just wouldn't come. And the teacher said to me, I'm tired of you not preparing for class. You will never amount to anything. I don't know why you're in this class. And, that was just one illustration. I'll not go anymore. Again, don't view me as a victim. But God was able to help me to overcome. And that's what I want to dwell on. But what am I to be? My mother had hoped my brother would have become a minister. I speculate that may have been their argument when he dropped out of college and joined the Army. I speculate. I don't know that. My brother's been gone far too long. My sister-in-law, his wife, however, did confirm that. Moody Bible Institute was something I was familiar with because our youth showed some of these Moody science films you may have recalled from that era. The radio program was on my mother's radio constantly. And my mother thought maybe I could go to Muhi and maybe I could become a missionary. Well, I knew Muhi had an missionary aviation program. I thought, oh, neat, I could fly an airplane. Forgetting that math and physical sciences were not my strong point. So I applied to Muhi and I was accepted. But when I had to take the test for missionary aviation, well, I failed it quite miserably. So they allowed me to take what was called the Young Revival course, which I took. When I entered Muhi at the age of 17, I was quite undisciplined in study habits. It seemed like regardless of how hard I studied, it made no difference anyway. So my study habits were not good. That's Moody Bible Institute. The building right up there is the women's dorm, the main building there, the men's dorm, and the auditorium that was not yet finished at that time. That photo was taken from the roof of the Lawson YMCA, which was 2 short blocks away. Moody had run out of dormitory space for the men, so they rented one whole floor of the YMCA. And I climbed up on the roof and took that photograph. Way off in the distance, that long building, which is on, you can't see the Chicago River there, but that's Montgomery Ward. So I entered Moody. My grades were not very good that first year. So in the month of June, when school was over, I was notified by the dean of men that, Errol, you are on academic probation. When you come back next semester, you either improve your grades or you will be asked to leave. So that brings me to the next crisis that I face. I'm a counselor for the second summer in a role at the Grand Rapids YMCA camp. I had already told my mother, I said, she wanted to know how school went. I said, not good, don't want to talk about it. I'm not going back. But she said, well, you got the summer to think about it and I'll pray for you. I didn't always appreciate what she was saying when she said she was praying for me because I didn't like the tension that was going back and forth between my parents. But I went to camp that summer, but as the summer wore on, I began to really wrestle with, does God have a purpose for my life? I debated, no, Harold, you're born with a left palate, face it, speech impediment, face it. God doesn't have a plan for your life. This argument went on. I would take long walks at night after the boys were asleep. The other counselors would gather in the lodge and play cards. And I would argue with God. Do you really have a purpose for my life? I don't see it. Well, after one very restless night, I got up before dawn. I went down to the lake shore, took a canoe off the rack, grabbed a paddle, slipped out into the water. Dawn is just beginning to lighten the eastern sky. Mist is rising from the lake. It was like a mirror. And I said, God, I really think you want me to go back to Moody. I said, I will study hard. I will discipline myself. And I will expect you to reveal to me what my purpose in life might be. And it was like a load had been lifted off my shoulders. Tears in my eyes. I paddled back to the shore, put the canoe back on the rack. Getting near time when the bugle will blow to wake us up, and got back to the cabin in time for the boys to be awakened. I went to Moody that fall with a new sense of purpose. Disciplined myself. I got off academic probation that very first semester. Moody had what they call, and they still do, practical Christian work assignments. And you were given 2 assignments a semester. I was assigned to a Skid Row mission for the next 2 years. The Chicago Rescue Mission on Madison Avenue. Madison Avenue is no longer because the freeway comes right through that area. And this is a picture of Skid Row. Well, I was not, let me back up. There was a team of about 12 people assigned to the Skid Row mission. The school bus would drop us off. And the team would usually had 3 or 4 students who were pre-ministerial. So they would be expected to preach, periodically to rotate. There would usually be a couple of young ladies and a couple of men who were in the music program, and they were expected to provide music. I was young revival, which meant, we were expected to hand out tracts out front and to try to encourage people to come in, and to counsel men when they went forward after the invitation. Well, I didn't want to pass out tracts because I saw what was happening. They were being thrown away. The sidewalk was littered with them, I counseled some of the men, 18 years old, what do I know? And, I heard one sob story after another. I reflected back, and many of those men I'm sure are what we would now call schizophrenic. They were people with mental illnesses, serious emotional problems. And sometimes the same man, next week would be the same man. Well, wait, I talked with you last week. And I thought, I really want to find out more about the neighborhood. Who are some of the people standing in the stoopway and who never come in? Well, we were advised never to leave for our own safety without another person. I could not find one person who was willing to go with me out into the neighborhood. So I ventured out alone. About 30 yards down the block, here's a man at the stoop on crutches, missing one leg. "Hey, Slim, come over here." I always have my Bible with me. "You with that mission?" "Yeah, I am," I explained to him. "Well, they won't do anything for us people here on the street, or who live here. Well, all they care about is these drunks, and they, keep coming day after day." Anyway, I asked him about his life. He was a World War I veteran, lost his leg in the war, living on a veteran's pension. And I said, "Well, I'd like to talk more. I have to go back. The bus will be picking me up. But I'd like to talk with you some more. I'll be back next week." He began to explain to me, and I did. We talked week after week. He told me about the neighborhood. "You see that kid over there? He's 8 years old. His mother gives him a dime. He goes to that theater down there. He sleeps there all night so his mother can prostitute herself in the apartment. They ought to be doing something for these kids on the street." So I was talking with my father. And anyway, um, now it's cold November. I'm walking down and I don't see him. I thought, well, it's too cold out. But I see a group of a gang of kids coming up the street. They're punching drunks and kicking them. And then they see me with my Bible. "Oh, preacher boy, hey, we want your money." They're surrounding me. I don't have any money. I pull out my pocket, see, no money. They began punching me in the chest. All of a sudden, wham! Someone hit this boy who was their head guy, and crutches go flying. And it's my friend. And he tells them to get out of there using words that shouldn't be repeated. And I help him up, and I said, "Man, where'd you come from?" I came down, I saw what was happening. And I said, "Thank you." And he was my mentor. He was the one who gave me a vision to go into social work. God revealed to me what became a purpose for my life. Well, I had a couple of struggles. Social work, sounds like socialism. My mother was not happy with that. She was hoping I would become a missionary. Well, I had a professor, Howard Voss, V-O-S. He grew up in the RCA. And I talked with him. He said, social work's a great profession for a believer. I said, "Would you be willing to talk with my mother?" "Why, of course." He gave me his phone number and some hours when he would be available in his office. And I wrote my mother, and she called him. Well, that helped a little. Pardon me. Forgot. Well, anyway, fast forward, I went to Hope College. I don't know if anyone remembers Dr. Robert Gazan, but He and I had many conversations, and he encouraged me to go to graduate school. He said, God has a purpose for your life in social work. And I went to a graduate school, but in between, I met a wonderful young lady. But I do, before I get to that point, want to share this, because that verse began to take on special meaning. For we are God's handiwork. Even me with a cleft palate, speech impediment, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. I had some Christian friends. Sounds to me like the social gospel you're going into. God prepared in advance for me to do good works, not to be a missionary. That was for my son. My mother didn't live to see our son go into to become a missionary. So her prayers were answered, but a generation later. The summer of 1957, I was employed by the Protestant Youth Organization to be the program director of a summer camp for underprivileged children. And God in His providence brought a young lady who had just graduated from Wheaton College, who was to start being an elementary teacher that fall, but thought it'd be nice to have a summer job. She saw it posted on the bulletin board at Wheaton College and applied and became a girls' counselor. Well, you can see why I was attracted. We took long walks together, learned about each other, learned about our dreams, and we fell in love, and we were married a year later. Good Baptist young lady, Wheaton College graduate. Hope in Wheaton have a sports competitive relationship. So this was a wonderful event in my life. There was a young lady willing to look past my impediment to see that there was something more there. Her parents, who I love, gave me and our children unconditional love. Here's a picture of our family taken in 1984. Paul was in college. Our daughter, Elaine, had just graduated from high school, was in community college, and our youngest, Anne, was in high school. Anne went on to become a lawyer, but shortly after passing the New York bar, died of cancer. Our daughter Elaine and her husband have 3 wonderful children, and our son Paul and his wife Lisa have 4 wonderful children, 3 of whom are married, and one of Elaine's children are married. We have 4 great-grandchildren. After earning a master's degree at U of M, University of Michigan, I began my career with the Department of Social Services, working with delinquent boys at the maximum security unit located 12 miles north of Ann Arbor. We were members of University Reformed Church in Ann Arbor at that time. Then I received a promotion I became director of youth rehabilitation camps, one in Brayling, one in Houghton Lake. And these boys were involved in various conservation projects. A great experience. I just love that work. When we were first at the Camp Brayling, camp near Brayling, that's an old CCC camp. And we lived in a house trailer on grounds. And it was great fun. Our son, our oldest firstborn, was only a half year old. And the boys love him, you know. May I, let me hold him, let me, you know, he had, and he thought it was great. He had 50 brothers, all looking after him. I went on to various promotions. Here's a photograph of me with Governor Milliken. I'm the tallest one and directly behind him. I had done some work on this piece of legislation, which would allow for the establishment of 6-bed homes, foster homes for adults, foster homes for children, to live in single-family zoned areas. This was a very controversial legislation. I remember going to Canton Township, suburb of Detroit, having to defend, at that time the legislation had not yet passed, and having to speak in front of a school auditorium in which people were standing. The auditorium was full, and being challenged of how I was promoting the destruction of property values by allowing foster homes for adults who were, well, you know, they were retarded, you know. They might exploit their children. They might, you know, all kinds of things. Fear-mongering. And trying to answer their questions. So that was the legislation that I was involved in, trying to explain and defend. Governor Milliken, we knew each other personally, and I can't go into the various reasons why, but my favorite governor. I received an honor that, you know, still confounds me. Awarded at a large banquet in Detroit. And this is a Public Servant of the Year award. It's awarded to a public servant. It can be municipal, township, county, or state, of which there are about 100,000. And to be selected was quite an honor. At that time, I was deputy for all programs having to do with public accountability, requiring a person of integrity. This was during the Blanchard administration, a Democrat governor. Engler was elected and took office in 1991. Some of my colleagues who were at the deputy level had an appointment and were told that they were no longer would be a part of the senior administration level. Well, now it's March. people are coming to me, have you had your meeting yet? I said, no, I leave it in God's hands. Aren't you worried? Well, I would be less than honest if I said no. Well, finally I'm called in. The new director, I knew his wife, who was a social worker. And he asked me some questions about child welfare and juvenile justice. I shared my recommendations. He thanked me, and I left. Wow, the secretary, what happened? I explained. A week later, I'm called in. Well, talk with the governor. We want you to take over all responsibilities for all social services, 14 programs, child welfare, juvenile justice, migrant affairs, etc. I was quite overwhelmed. So that, in a nutshell, my Jewish family roots. If you're interested, there's one in the library. I have a couple here. You're welcome to borrow them. My name, I found out, means cancer. And my great-grandfather and his father were cantors and kosher butchers. And this is the home in where my family lived. My ancestors had a butcher shop on the first floor, and they lived above it. And that's the shop. The Jewish cemetery, my family name is here. Every Jew in that town of Middle Harness on the island of Overflocking were died in the Holocaust. God moved, this is a poem. Jeff, of course, knows William Cooper. And this is a hymn, the first verse of a hymn. God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. He plants his footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm. Deep in unfathomable minds of never failing skill, he treasures up his bright designs and works his sovereign will. To God alone be the glory for my life. All our lives, we are all recipients of God's providential grace. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's really